we started. Thanks, guys. I think I've actually met most of you before. Thanks for the intro, Jared. Today I'm going to touch on a few different things. I'm a pretty informal guy, as you can see from my kit. It's not going to be much like previous week. I thought Ben did a great job last week, really professional presentation. I'm a bit more of an informal guy myself, and what I want to touch on today is just a few different things which I've got the luxury of speaking of, which is basically just some commonalities between strength and conditioning and pro sport environments. The reason I wanted to touch on this as a topic was I've worked in a few different sports now, and quite often a question I get when I speak to people is, what's it like training AFL guys? What's it like training baseball guys? What's it like training, NBL guys, college football guys? And it's actually a really good talking point. I think it's a chance for me to sort of discuss the similarities as opposed to dividing the industry into what's different. We all know there's a lot of differences out there, generally speaking, between philosophies and training methods and that sort of stuff. And largely that will be dictated by the coach. So not for a second do I believe that my experiences are a reflection of the community as a whole, but I do want to use them to enlighten you guys on what I have sort of been exposed to previously. So like everywhere, there's I know some different guys in the NBA, and you can walk into some programs there that have real strong strength-based focuses, and other teams that barely lift weights. Then you've got some with such a shit culture that I actually heard a player of their walked in, they get fined 10 grand for missing team lifts, and one player walked in with $1 million and goes, "Well, that should do me for the season, so I won't be coming to your lifts." So you got some things like that out there. Then you got some guys who are training really, really hard and doing what we consider the sort of basic lifts, and that's in the same sport. So again, it is my experiences within them. So keep that in mind as we're going through it. I'm my PowerPoint now, guys. It's if she loads up. All right. Can you guys still hear me okay there? We're all good? I'll assume yes, because I think you guys probably got on mute.
Yeah, you're all good.
Alrighty. So what I want to start with was just reiterate what Jared's touched on, but I think it's really important when we have these conversations to be transparent around where my experiences have been obtained from. As I said before, I don't believe that mine are a reflection of the whole strength and conditioning community, but I can give you my background just the same. So one of my first experiences in pro sport was in Collingwood. I was there as an intern 2014 and 2015. I spent some time at Melbourne and in Casey as both a rehab guy with AFL and high performance manager with the VFL. I did go to NC State in a seasonal assistant, pretty much like an intern, which I was fortunate for, is that I wasn't a paid strength coach because there's only allowed 5 of those with the NCAA rules. There were some interns below me, so I was just sort of in the middle where I didn't have any expenses. I got paid for food, allowances, all that sort of stuff, but I wasn't paid coach by the same token. So that's the only real difference with that. And now I'm currently at Melbourne United in the NBL. So they're where I've drawn my experience from a professional side of things. To be honest, I've probably equally, if not more, enjoyed the semi-professional side of things. I spent a lot of time with juniors in TEC Cup. I spent 7 years at the Western Jets, Vic Metro. I worked with the Melbourne Aces with the ABL. So I've worked quite a few different sports, and that's basically going to be the crux of where my presentation stems from today. Oh, and there's one last bloke there, Christian Woodford, with his little head floating in. I do still work in the private sector. I used to work with Woody quite a bit. Strange fella, polarizing fella, but he and I get along great. He was a really good mentor of mine early on, and a lot of my beliefs in some way were at least framed from working with him for a period of time as well. So I think the next thing to move into is where coaching philosophies fall. And this is not so much an X's and O's coach philosophies, but from my experiences I've probably worked with close to 70, 80 coaches in the professional sector, just in pro sport. And then obviously I've worked with a lot of coaches in sub-elite sport as well. From, as I said, TC Cup to, VFL, all sorts of different things. And basically what I have found over time is I like to sort of watch how coaches coach, not necessarily what they're coaching, just how they're coaching, how they're thinking, and what sort of frames their belief system. So I've basically boiled it down to the 4 main ones I see, and I'll just elaborate on these a little bit. So the everything looks like a nail coach is generally the coaches that I see that are a little bit younger, straight out of uni, probably only had one real mentor in their career. And the reason I call them everything looks like a nail coach is it's the old saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And how that sort of manifests itself in programming and philosophies is Christian. For example, Christian Woodford, I've worked with him quite a lot. He runs his Big Six, and he's unashamedly a big fan of what he does his own work, obviously. And it's not that he falls in this category as such, but the principle is that he goes, okay, we're just going to do weights. So that's all we're going to do. And when you get some really strong-willed people, they go, well, it doesn't matter if you're a rugby player, a soccer player, a track sprinter, a golfer, all you're going to do is squat, dead bench, maybe some lunges, and that's it. Because that's all they know. And because that's all they know, that's all they implement into their coaching. That's not to say it's a bad thing. There's actually a great level of humility in doing so, because there's nothing worse in my eyes than people who try to coach things and program things that they either don't know how to coach or they've never been exposed to, and they don't know how to do themselves as well. So whilst it does sound like it's quite a negative connotation, it's really not. It's basically just the coaches that say, this is my skill set, this is what I've got, and this is what we're going to do. And you see it quite a lot with people who come from PT background as well. The plug the gaps coach is basically the direct opposite of the reverse engineer coach. And the plug the gaps coach is someone who goes, okay, well, if, for example, I'm working with basketballers. So basketballers, what they do a lot of is a lot of jumping. They do a lot of lateral movements, and they do a lot of accelerations and decelerations. What they don't do a lot of is sprints over 40 meters. They don't do a lot of double leg jumps a whole lot. Sometimes there's a lot of single leg jumps. They don't do a lot of forceful work in the transverse plane. So the people who sort of the plug the gaps coach go, well, if you are doing a lot of jumping and a lot of XL and decel work and a lot of frontal lateral movements in the frontal plane, it's my job to do the opposite. You're probably missing out a lot of strength work. You're probably missing out a lot of explosive work in the transverse plane where a lot of power is generated from. You're probably missing out on some other aspects of strength and conditioning because you're doing so much jumping and XL work. The plug the gaps coach goes, okay, you're doing that, I'm going to do everything else, which is just a total different philosophy to the reverse engineer coach. The reverse engineer coach is someone who I find looks at the sport's demands and works back from that and tries to mirror them as closely as possibly they can. So rugby players will end up doing a lot of things like heavy reduced range squats, a lot of prowler work, a lot of wrestling, a lot of grappling, and all those sorts of things that their sport entails. The reverse engineer coach picks the demands of the sport and goes, okay, that's what we're going to replicate from a strength and conditioning standpoint. And obviously the exercise selection and the programming reflects that accordingly. And the fourth one is the My Sport is Special coach, which are the coaches that sort of go, okay, I'm a strength coach for golfers because golf's a unique sport, or I'm a strength coach for basketballers because basketball's a unique sport. And what they do is they take the demands of their sport and make it very, very intricate, very technical. Again, not necessarily to be a negative thing for any of these. It's more just how I sort of see how they frame their decision-making processes. And then what sort of stems from that is they complicate, when I say complicate, again, it sounds negative, but they delve very, very, very deep into the X's and O's of their profession. So not that this is a perfect example, but someone like Cressy, who works with a lot of baseballers. He knows the intricate nature of baseball and the special demands that baseball does have, from excessive range of motion through some external rotation, internal rotation movements. But he also has a very thorough understanding of the biomechanics and the kinematics accordingly. So he does use some of those principles in other sports. And he, like I said, he's not the best example, but I'm sure you can sort of, in your head, start to look at some coaches that sort of fall in one of these four categories primarily. And I believe if we're being honest with ourselves, each of us probably feels an affinity to one of these four particular categories, depending what background you've had. I think where we need to be moving as a profession is to chase the Dragon Balls in the middle and really look to sort of bring all these four things together. So sometimes there's a really good case for being an everything looks like a nail coach, just the basic athleticism, squats, press, pulls, lunges, sprinting, jumping, and that's all they need to do. There's a time to the plug the gaps coach. For example, if you're coaching swimmers, they're doing a lot of shoulder extension work, a lot of scap depression work through their swim stroke. So it's probably not your job to then go and add in more pull-ups and more straight arm lat pull downs because they're in such depression all the time. You might need to plug the gap and get them reaching, or get them doing some movements that are going to benefit their body holistically, as opposed to overloading the same pattern over and over again, because some sports like that lend themselves to overuse injuries in the same way baseball does as well. The reverse engineer coach is still a good position to be in. It means you have a care for the sport. You have a real desire to be successful in understanding what your athletes are working through. And again, there's a time for that as well. So again, these things are not negative things. They may sound that way, but it's just sort of how I see majority of philosophy sort of fall in these areas. And myself, I'm trying to centralize all these things into different parts. But I think that's the quest that I find myself on from a coaching standpoint. So just quickly, I'll get you guys to jump off mute for a second. Does anyone know what the Pareto Rule is? A really common one.
Can you repeat that again? You broke up.
Do you know what the Pareto Rule is?
That's the 80-20 rule, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, good one. So I'm on my slideshow here, so I can't see who answered that, but that's exactly right. So,
Jay, quickly, are we meant to be seeing the slides as well?
Yeah, could you not see them?
No, we can only see you. If you go into share screen, you should be able to choose the desktop you want to share.
Oh shit, my bad. All right, I better run you back through that. Sorry, guys. I thought I'd already shared it.
There we go. You got us now.
My bad. Appreciate the heads up. Okay, so this is the slide I was just discussing previously. All right, so when I was talking about the Dragon Balls, this is what I was referring to. So I sort of feel like you've got the everything looks like a nail coach, which we discussed, the plug the gaps coach, the my sport is special coach, and the reverse engineering coach. Thanks for the heads up, Jared. I thought I'd already shared the screen there. And as I said, with around centralizing your philosophy, this is it here, where I'm chasing the Dragon Balls. I want to get my philosophy and my thought processes to be really centralized between all these four main areas. Alrighty. So yeah, the Pareto Rule is the 80-20 rule, and I'll give you the background of the 80-20 rule, but then what I'm going to do is explain for myself how I apply that to my coaching on a daily basis. So as it says here, the 80-20 rule is basically that 80% of your outcomes, so 80% of your output comes from 20% of your input. And whilst it's more of a business background in terms of its principle, for me, it does have some really good grounding in strength and conditioning, because it actually raises a few questions. And one of the questions it raises for me is, what is the 80% we're searching for? And I believe that the 80% that we're searching for, generally speaking, for strength and conditioning and athlete development, particularly at the elite level, it just comes down to speed and power. And at least 90% of the time, I sort of feel like the end goal of programs comes down to either speed or power or a combination of. There's not many examples that I can think of where we're training field-based athletes and the end goal is pure strength. So when we keep in mind that we're searching for the 80%, which is probably going to be a speed and power focus, the question is then, how do we usually pursue this? And what I see quite commonly is we don't even look at the end goal for our programs. We just sort of know the process we're going to use to get there, which is one part of it. But the important part is knowing where we're going and knowing where we want to get to. So keep in mind that's not always the case, but the majority of the time we do want to end up with a speed and power outcome. So improvements in speed and power on the court, on the field, or on the track if you're dealing with track athletes. We need to know that, and that's really, really important to understand that process. So how do we usually pursue this is the question that I wanted to address. And most of the time we get sort of stuck into a vortex of using strength work to try and move ourselves towards a goal. And we've probably all gone through it. It's where you get an athlete and they come in and they say, I want to get faster. I want to be better on the football field. I want to be better on the soccer field. And the first thing we do is we go to RDLs, we go to squats, we go to lunges, and we go, yeah, we're going to build a strength base. We're going to build a strength base, which is great. But you need to look at it and go, okay, well, if 80% of the outcomes coming from 20% of our input, then the 20% needs to be very, very heavily geared towards speed and power development. And then we can obviously just, factor in little bits and pieces as we go. So that's one interpretation of it that I use as it pertains to strength and conditioning, which will lead me just into my next slide. So this is my version of the 80-20 rule, which is totally different from the Pareto principle. So I've got 5 Olympic rings, which I generate my programming from. Number 1 is gymnastics. Number 2, and this is in the middle for a reason, it comes from track and field. Number 3 is from martial arts. Number 4 is from weightlifting. And number 5 is from yoga. So for me, what I try and do, and again, this is a different way of expressing the 80-20 rule, 80% of my programming will come from one of these 5 disciplines. And I'll elaborate on this in the next slide, but I unashamedly love the Olympics. I'm spewing they're being cancelled this year, but as a strength and conditioning coach and someone who loves athletic performance, there's so much to learn from what these guys are doing at the top level. I have watched Icarus and it ruined it a lot for me, unfortunately, but it's still pretty incredible to see what these guys can actually get their body to do. And from a learning point of view, I sort of feel strength and conditioning goes in cycles, and what's old becomes new again, and then it gets forgotten, and it just goes in cycles. But I look at the success in these sports and disciplines. Gymnastics has not changed a whole lot in 150 years. Track and field hasn't changed a lot in 150 years. Martial arts hasn't changed a lot. Yoga hasn't changed in thousands of years. And weightlifting has not changed in decades upon decades in terms of how it's done. So there's obviously some finessing as they go, but I generally believe that success leaves clues, and that's why I derive so much of my programming from these particular areas. So when I say this is my 80-20 rule, this is the 80%. So I'm sure the obvious question is, where does the 20% stem from? So this is probably the most important part, is just knowing what that looks like. So we've got the 80% at the top here. So the 80% will come from, as you can see, the 5 rings. Gymnastics, track and field, martial arts, weightlifting, and yoga. So to go one extra layer on each of these topics, specifically what can we learn from gymnastics and what can we implement better from gymnastics if we think about going back to our original goal? Again, to repeat the Pareto principle, 80% of our outcome and our output will come from 20% of our input. So that 20% is sort of how we're sort of going, okay, what are we actually prescribing to have that big output? And I think from a strength and conditioning point of view, some of the things that get lost amongst the journey because we're so often confined to weight rooms, especially at the moment due to COVID, where not even confined to weight rooms, we're actually confined to barbells, and we're confined to, you know, bodyweight exercises in the park. And it's really easy to sit there and go, oh, you know, we're in a holding pattern, we're treading water, but there's so many different disciplines of exercise which you can still use to progress you towards your goal with field-based athletes, which are primarily going to be a speed and power base. So as you can see there, isometrics are a phenomenal example of what gymnasts do better than anybody else. And I believe as a strength and conditioning professional that they are criminally underused. If you guys watch the Olympics, the guys in the Roman rings, for example, who can hold themselves in iron cross positions, hold themselves on the hobby horse things they are, I forget what they're called, the beams. They can put their body and contort their body into such obtuse positions, but hold it for so long. So that's obviously a great component of strength. Now, a big part of having strength is having stability prior to that, because stability precedes force production in every single circumstance. And you can't, and this is good, Eric Cressy saying, which he says it all the time, you can't shoot a cannon from a canoe. So if you can't shoot a cannon from a canoe, how do we make a really, really stable battleship to shoot the cannon from? And isometrics are a great way of doing that. And I believe gymnastics does that better than anybody. And that's not just wall sits, you know, sometimes it's low plank holds. Sometimes it's actually, you know, hanging on parallel bars. Sometimes it's doing hip flexion holds in 90-degree angles, all those sorts of things that are gymnastics origin. Bounding comes from gymnasts. I'm not sure if you guys are already gymnasts, but I know they have a rebound floor, but the power of some of those men and the women especially, like Simone Biles, that they can generate in, you know, 4 to 5 bounds to go from corner to corner with their floor routines. That's just such raw, pure power that they're expressing so rapidly. And I think we can learn a lot from that, that they're only doing 3, 4, 5 bounds before they go into their flips, their tumbles, their rolls, their jumps. And that's where all the acceleration and the momentum has to come from. Again, when you're trying to scale back your program to real basics, that's a great way to go about it too. And finally, for all sports really, whether you're doing UFC, rugby, soccer, footy, tumbling and landings, you can learn a lot from gymnasts in that regard too. Kinesthetic awareness, just body control, how to brace yourself for a land, how to absorb a landing. All we do as coaches, generally speaking, is we go, okay, go 67-meter box, jump off and then hold, jump off and then stick, land on a single leg. But, you know, how often do we teach an athlete to come off a box and fall and land on their hands out front? How often do we, you know, get an athlete to fall over from a standing start, just fall and catch yourself in push-up position? Gymnasts would eat these things up for breakfast, and yet when we look at tumbles and landings for us, it's just box landings, single leg box landings, single leg box jumps, and those sorts of things. So if you ever get stuck with progressions and regressions for tumbling and landings, just Google some gymnasts and what they can do, and you'll find 500 different ways to develop an athlete's force absorption from just watching gymnasts move. It's actually quite incredible. Track and field's the low-hanging fruit, and as I said before, when we're really looking at the outcome of our programs, it does usually come down to faster sprints, bigger jumps, and more explosive throws. That's the crux of what we're trying to program for. If you've got a baseballer or a cricketer, you want more powerful, harder throws. If you've got a basketballer or a long jumper, you know, or even a striker playing soccer who's trying to hit a goal, you want higher, more powerful jumps. And for all those sports in their entirety, we want better sprinting, faster sprinting, more repeatable sprinting with less chance of injury. What we can learn from martial arts is force expression. I believe martial artists do that better than anybody, period. Their ability to work at multiple planes of motion with rapid body weight, forceful movements is just unparalleled. And their weight distribution is a really good thing as well. So some things like if you're working with golfers, for example, or you work with baseballers, or you work with tennis players, you know, there's such a weight distribution between shifting to the right leg and then accelerating through to the left leg. In golf, tennis, cricket, I'm not sure if you guys follow cricket much, but fast bowlers, leg hits the ground, the weight distribution has to come over the center of mass in the hips and sling the ball forward. AFL football is how they distribute their weight as they're coming towards goal for a set shot. Are they decelerating as they kick, or are they accelerating through the kicking motion and landing on the kicking leg to really propel the ball faster? Soccer players taking a corner, they basically have to kick around the corner flag. So how they can contort their body and shift their weight to accelerate the ball is really important in that regard as well. Weightlifting is the obvious one. Cleans, snatches, jerks. Yeah, we can all learn that. But pretty much every basic barbell exercise you can name has origins in weightlifting. Whether it's the Romanian deadlift, the snatch grip deadlift, overhead squats, front squats, all your presses, all your pulls, they do have some sort of origin in weightlifting down the track. And obviously we use that to generate, both hypertrophy, but just strength and force development of the muscles as well. And finally, yoga, which you could probably put Pilates in this too, to be honest. But the things that we can derive from yoga, breath control, really, really important. How you center yourself. You're taking a mark 30 meters out directly in front of goal. And how can you compose yourself before your next action? So you're trying to kick a goal to win the game. Can you get your breath under control and actually stabilize your body? The range of motion work through yoga, the core strength is incredible. I first started doing yoga actually when I moved to America. And I was in a room with, fat CEOs, college girls, mums who just drop their kids off at after school care. And I'm like, I'm going to smoke these guys. This will be fine. And I've never been so out of my comfort zone, even holding side planks and even crescent lunges and tree poses, things that you sit there and go, yeah, well, I can squat 150. Like, why can't I hold a tree pose? Or, I can do heaps of pull-ups. Why can't I hold a side plank with abduction, all these movements? And there's a real specificity around strength, but I think yoga does a great job from a general prep point of view of general motor control, general balance improvement, and breathing control as well. It's actually phenomenal. And most of my warm-ups for any sport combine all of these things. So this is the beauty of where I like to have these things mapped out. Because for me, if you watch weightlifters warm up, if you give a weightlifter a barbell and watch them warm up, they're a weightlifter by what they're doing, how they're doing it, as compared to the average Joe who walks in the gym. If you see a gymnast warming up, they're a gymnast. Jared and I have been coaching down at Moorabbin Athletics track quite a lot recently. I'm sure Jared will attest to this. When someone's warming up as a track athlete and you watch them warm up, do you know they're a track athlete before they even sprint, yeah? And sometimes you sit there and go, why doesn't mine look like that? Damn barbecue pit. But that's literally what you see. Like, you see some people A-skip and you go, yeah, they're a track guy, because it's just an ingrained pattern. So, and then a lot of my mobility stuff comes from yoga. So, or whether I'm weightlifting myself or going for a sprinting session, there's so many great poses and stabilizing positions you can learn from, just exposure to yoga practices. So that's the 80%, which probably leads to the next question of what's in the 20%. So I'd like to leave this here because I can't derive a whole program in a high performance environment from that. And nor have I seen that in anywhere I've worked. But what I have seen is in all the elite environments, I'll show you some examples later on it. But all these things are prevalent in every single elite place I've worked in some regard. So the 20%, it's obviously just going to see there. It comes from physio and comes from bodybuilding practices. And the reason I like to leave those there, there's always something more you can do to your program. Whether it's a necessity or not is obviously very contextual, but physios are unparalleled at prescribing corrective exercises. I hate the term, but activation, prehab, rehab. A lot of those things that we use now as strength coaches, like, crab walks and hip extensions and that sort of stuff, as much as we don't like to admit it, the origins are not from strength and conditioning. They've come from a physiotherapy or a remedial background. And you can learn a lot from bodybuilders. If you ask a bodybuilder how to isolate a muscle, they might not know the scientific way of doing it, but they can give you a list of 5, 6, 7 exercises that will isolate the muscle. So as strength coaches, we look at it and go, how do you isolate the glutes? We all go, bridges, like do bridges. And that's it. That's our go-to move. But when you speak to bodybuilders, they'll go, you can do this exercise, this exercise, this exercise, this exercise, this exercise, just to isolate the glute. And you go, shit, there's some stuff in my program that I can include that does come from not a martial arts background, not a track and field background, but it'll come from bodybuilding. And that goes to my last point there, which you can see the bodybuilding community are really innovative. Like sometimes you see shit and going, what the fuck are they doing? But they find ways to make exercises work for their singular purpose. And that's a great skill. Again, there's not always a science behind it. It's quite often anecdotal. But if you ask a strength coach, how do you isolate the quads? They'll probably say front squat, heels up, and keep your torso vertical during a squat pattern. You ask a bodybuilder, they'll give you 25 different answers, all equally as effective. So that's always worth keeping in mind for athletes who can't squat or athletes who are in rehab and that sort of thing, which in a high performance environment is really important. So this is sort of how I've mapped out my beliefs, and I've basically pinned this together from what I've seen work in different sports. So again, I've worked at football at the elite level. I've worked at college football at the elite level. Now working in basketball at the elite level. And I did some work with the various roles at some point as well. And it got me thinking about how I map out my philosophies and where I sort of see the similarities between the movements. So what I've done here is I've taken the Olympic rings, as I've shown you before. There's a little graph down the bottom there so you can track it yourself. But this is how I sort of foresee the parallels that you can take into any sport, anytime, based on the basics of what we've already covered so far. Whether you're coaching golfers, baseballers, tennis players, NBA, NFL, this is the method I would take to approach that. So how this sort of works, you can see on the spectrum here, we've got the general and specific. So if you look at the general to specific spectrum, this is probably, has anyone read Franz Bosch's stuff? Anyone familiar with Franz Bosch's work? Some maybe, some won't be. Look, what Franz Bosch, and I'm not a big fan of his, but his general to specific and specific to overload spectrum was the inspiration for me to write this. What we've seen in the past is we've seen this done with exercises. So down the specific end, we see exercises such as sprinting. Here, we'd probably say sled work or a sprinting with sled behind us. In the middle would be a prowler. And then the general stuff would just be squats and lunges and that sort of thing. So we see this same graph mapped out across here. We've seen that with exercises. What I want to do was actually use the same spectrum, but map it out with biomotor qualities and how they can be developed in sports. And from what I've seen, when you're coaching speed for a Premier League soccer player, an NFL wide receiver, a wingman in the AFL, or a fullback in NRL, 99.9% of what you program from a speed point of view would be the same. And who coaches speed here? Do a lot of you guys coach speed sessions or have coached a few speed sessions in the past? Yeah, I'm sure most of you have at some point. And to be honest, they're all the same. There's some sort of skip movement. There might be some sort of bounding movement. There might be some technical things. But at the end of the day, if you gave me a wide receiver that plays for the Dallas Cowboys and a fullback who played for Liverpool and said, okay, you need to do a speed session, you can probably do the same thing. And for me, that's where it's very, very much down the general end of the spectrum from a biomotor quality point of view. Accordingly, all the environments I've found myself in, quite literally, AFL, college football, even Melbourne United, the speed stuff doesn't vary a whole lot. Maybe the starting position, maybe how long it goes for, but it's usually pretty similar. Contrasting that, if I flip down the other end, as you can see here, the reason I've got so many rings down the specific end, this is mobility, movement, and motor control. And as you can see down the bottom here, the blues gymnastics, blacks track and field, etc. For each of these disciplines, and from a sporting point of view specifically, the most important thing that gives you direct transfer to your sport will be the movements that are associated with it. So whilst, as I said down here, in contrast, speed can be pretty much as general as you like, because speed is speed. At the end of the day, that's what it is. Motor control, movements and mobility can afford to get a bit more specific. So here's some examples. If you have a baseballer you're probably going to want to have some specific movements for arm care that mimic the extension, the thoracic flexion, external rotation, internal rotation, all those sorts of things. If you're working with a golfer, you're going to want to have some specific movement in the transverse plane that has hip rotation, hip extension, those sorts of things. Now, I'm not saying to load these skills. I'm talking purely from just the movement itself. The most specific movements are the sports themselves, and that's why they fall down this end of the spectrum with motor control and mobility. When we take one step back from that end, so slightly less specific, but much more than general, one of the things I've seen in all my experiences is power is very, very, very specific. So it's specific to the motor control, so obviously the skill, it's specific to the pattern, it's specific to the sport. So you can't get a powerful tennis player with a really, really big serve and then expect them to have a powerful kick in soccer. They're both powerful, but they're very, very different movements. So when you're programming exercises for power, they do need to be a bit more specific than the more general. So you can use general power exercises, but end of the day, again, speed and power is a lot more specific to the movement itself. And you might want to keep that in mind when you're picking your exercises accordingly. Flipping down the other end, strength. I'm a basic bitch with strength. I feel strength is more down the general end of the spectrum than the specific end. I leave the specific end, as you can see here, for movement, quality, and power exercises. All my strength is general. Sure, I might change the grip, I might change the tempo, I might change the range of motion, but front squats, lunges, RDLs, back squats, push presses, chin-ups, 95% athletes that I've worked in all those sports will do the same strength exercises. You're just going to adapt it accordingly. Most of the basketballs I coach, I try and front squat them. It keeps the torso upright, takes out the excessive trunk flexion, which doesn't load the lower back. Much more friendly on their joints. I'm not sure if you've ever tried to see a 7-foot guy back squat. Looks a bit icky. But when you put them upright, it works really, really well. So again, the strength stuff, from all the weightlifting background, it's really, really, really general for me. And I've got conditioning here in the middle. So the conditioning for me, the best way to condition yourself is to play the sport itself at the exact requirements of the sport itself. But I do believe fundamentally that there is still a big, big area where general prep can still be really, really effective as well. So whilst I think that it's not necessary, you can't just go out and do specific conditioning for the sport and get better. I don't believe that. I think there does need to be some sort of base level of conditioning. Conversely, I don't think it's too general because you can't just do basic conditioning then expect to be excellent at your sport. So we did some tempo runs in college over 110s because that's the length of a college football field. So we definitely use 110s and some sprints and that sort of stuff, which is sort of in the middle. But the only way to get fit for college football is to play the sport. So we couldn't just go and just do swimming, cycling, cross training, rowers, and just do really, really general conditioning because that wasn't going to work for them. We couldn't just go and play the sport itself. It's just too taxing. So you have to sort of find a general mix in the middle that's not specific, not general, but it encapsulates different parts of the sport. And for me, that's how I map out my biomotor qualities through exercise selection. So just a quick recap, 99% of my speed sessions are the same. All my movement, mobility, and motor control sessions are basically specific to the athlete's sport and the requirements of their sport themselves. My power stuff's relatively specific to the sport, but not totally. My strength stuff's relatively general, but not totally. And my conditioning falls in the middle. So just to finish up here, I've got 2 examples of programs I've used, which will probably illustrate my points. This is an example of a program which we used at NC State, which was a 4-week program before we went into a max out. No, not a max out week. I think it was a deload week. But as you can see here, muscle clean plus front squat as a complex on session 1, power clean session 2, muscle snatch and overhead squat for session 3, power snatch session 4. So there's a good mix of, they want to develop the snatch. How specific you think that is up to you. They really valued it highly. So the best way to get better at the movement, based on that spectrum I've just showed you, was to do the movement. So it's a complex of the movement there, muscle snatch and overhead squat, and then make it powerful. Same thing with the clean, add the complex of the motor, get the movement right, get it really geared in, and then make it powerful. Basically, as the program followed through, it's a lower body push, lower body pull. Different lower body push, different lower body pull. Same thing with the upper body. Deloaded pull, loaded pull, which is sort of like your surfing the curve type vibe. And you can see that does run straight through, straight to the program there. That's only one small block, which we used. But again, those athletes are just freaks. And we got some great results from it. But obviously, I can't put every single program we use there because there's speed programs, there's power programs, there's plyo programs, there's warm-ups, and that I've still got a book of that stuff we did, and it's just phenomenal. But I'm sure you guys have all seen the clips on YouTube. Any college football setting or any real American football setting at the NFL level as well, it's not fancy. It's exactly the same lifts with a different variety. So they could change the tempo, they could change the resistance, they could use bands, they could use chains, they could sprint bottom, they could sprint with sleds, but at the crux of it, it's all really general basic prep movements. Whereas when we do our mobility work with the guys over there, the linemen did a lot more deep position stuff because they come out of the hole when the ball snapped. And the receivers did a lot more rotational movements and a lot more overhead movements because the receivers are a lot more overhead. The skill group, which obviously are kickers, snappers, punters, that sort of stuff, their motor control stuff was specifically to get their foot so it's like kicking directly into everyone's seen punters' legs that follow straight through. Far better than the AFL. And the reason they're far better than the AFL with their follow through is all their movement, their motor control, their mobility is designed to maximize that position. So as they kick, their leg goes from here to straight up. And I'm sure you guys have seen pictures of punters before, yeah? Their legs are just they almost keep themselves in their head like Wee Man. That doesn't come from generic mobility work, general motor control work. It comes from very, very specific work to get the legs to that point. Same with the quarterbacks. So here's some examples of some of the numbers these guys put up to give you some perspective on whilst I was over there. These numbers actually were before fall camp, and they got done after fall camp. So Contavious Street here, he cleaned 352 pounds. That's about 160 kilos, give or take, I think. At the end of fall camp, he came out and cleaned 400. He squatted 635 pre-fall camp, squatted 700 post. 700 pounds is like 315 kilos. Full range back squat, 315 kilos. He also benched 435, which is around the 200 mark. So as you can, and you know what, and Contavious got drafted to the 49ers. Josh Jones over here, he ran a 1.4 second 10-yard dash. So when you guys are sort of looking for speeds to compare it to, that's 9 meters, 9.1 meters. When you're doing 10-yard drills, 1.4 laser timed is lightning. To put it in perspective, and this might give you guys some ideas for when you're trying to program it. And this is why when I see guys on Twitter, and there's one guy who does it, and I'm not going to name him because I'm not in the business of doing that. I'm not going to call him out. But he claims he's got multiple guys who run 4.340s in his college. And Josh Jones, who got drafted to the Green Bay Packers as a safety, which is the fastest position in football, he ran a 4.34 laser timed at NC State and a 4.33 laser timed at the combine. So he was the fastest guy we had, and he went in the second round. So if you're at a small college or a high school in America and you see these guys posting clips of multiple DBs running 4.2s and 4.3s, they're fucking lying. They're just flat out lying because it doesn't happen. He's the fastest guy I've ever seen, and he didn't break 4.3. So that's just some context around when you see some numbers out there on YouTube clips and that sort of thing, don't get sucked into it because they're fucking lying. Yeah, that'll just give you an idea going through here. So Jared, there's BJ Hill, your guy at the Giants. And Justin Jones went to the Chargers. Jalen Samuels went to the Steelers. Bradbury went to the Vikings. There's J Sam again. So you can sort of see, the physical development of those guys does fast-track them quite a lot. And as I said, after fall camp, all those numbers went through the roof. So last one here, this is an example of sort of showing you the similarities of what programs can be like and how they amalgamated really, really well at the top level. This is a similar program to what we sort of run at Melbourne United through Visual Coach. So as you can see, I spoke about before how the disciplines are sort of merged together. Banded shuffles, they sort of come from the 20%. That's sort of from the physio realm. Lateral hopping and broad jumps, really derived from track and field and gymnastics origins. Weightlifting background, bodybuilding background, sort of specific to the sport, and that's just a sub movement there. So just really quick recap. So here's a elite level NBL program, nothing fancy to it. Here's an elite level college football program, and as for sure, I think from the 110 guys that were there when I was there, across those 4 years, 17 have gone to the NFL. So, it works. Like, they're beasts. And you can just see so many similarities between it that what I wanted to give you guys going away from this presentation was just a lot of confidence that when you go interview for a job or when you're discussing your philosophies with different people in different industries, don't be afraid to just be boring and be basic, but just understand how you can sort of manipulate all these things to get the results you want. If you're working with golfers, you might end up using more sort of martial arts movements and more sort of yoga movements as opposed to more weightlifting and track and field movements. But the origins of your program will still be the same. If you're working with a rugby club, you might use more track and field and more weightlifting. If you're working with a basketball club, you might be using more gymnastics and more weightlifting. But I generally believe that these sort of things, these 5 things here, if you in your head map out the derivatives of each one and where each one flows to, you can really work in any sport you like. So that was what I wanted to speak about today, because I've had the luxury of doing so. But it's just what I get quite often, like, what does a baseball program look like at the top level? What does the NBA program look like at the top level? And there's nowhere near as much difference as anybody thinks. Basically, the thing that it boils down to is how you execute the program and why you picked those certain exercises and how you've sort of justified it. So that's it from me. It's quite a lot to take in. Sorry, I actually didn't think it would take that long, but I've left a little bit of time here for some questions at the end. So if you guys want to demute yourselves, if you've got any questions, otherwise I'll throw it back to Jared.
I've got a question. I'll go first.
Who have I got there?
Stefan,
what's up, man?
Well, thanks for that presentation, and thanks, Jared, for organising it. I really like the Olympics ring. I think that was a really good visual.
Thank you.
I think you mentioned your gymnastics ring and tumbling and falling.
Yep.
I think you said you'd actually teach that to athletes. Was that right?
Not necessarily probably the way that gymnasts would do it, but I'd probably use the principles of some sort of tumbling stuff. Yeah. So more the principles and the drills themselves.
Yeah. So I guess, I did wrestling and jiu-jitsu for like a year and a half straight, and the stuff that I learned from those sports was pretty incredible.
Yeah, man, for sure. And that probably comes in where I said like the martial arts is a big part of it too.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, how would you approach like convincing the coach or the athlete, especially in a team setting, to, I guess, take that on board and be open-minded to that stuff? Because awesome. I'll tell people to try jiu-jitsu and wrestling and they kind of just laugh at me.
Yeah. Really, really good question, man. And you're in a really strong position to leverage that, because that skill set is highly sought after. I know, I won't name him, but I know a guy who coaches wrestling and tackling stuff in AFL clubs, and he charges like $1,000 an hour. Like it's wild, man. It's crazy world out there. So at the top level, it's really, really well embraced. But I think what that's going to give you, Stefan, is like a real different selling point when you go on for a job, man. Like, I mean, and I'll take it back through based on that question and how I sort of see it from a philosophy point of view. Is I'm by no means the best at any of these particular areas. I'm like a jack of all trades, master of none across the field. And if I was a high performance guy, I would probably look to hire someone with a track and field background to do the speed work for me. I'd hire someone with a weightlifting background to look after strength program. I'd hire a yoga person to work with a weightlifting person to do some sort of rehab stuff. And this thing here, the martial arts, if I was working in AFL or rugby, If you had a strength and conditioning background with some sort of martial arts component, man, that's vital. I think the only really way you can do it is just try and get one player to take it up. You might not get a whole team to do it, but what I've found really successful is when you can't break through to the whole team, pick a guy, improve them, and your athletes will be your best selling point out of everyone. And I say, like, I'm coaching a few guys from United at the moment, one-on-one. Well, I was until COVID hit. But yeah, I've got one guy that I sort of said, listen, man, I think I can work on your speed stuff. And I started doing some speed work with him individually, like outside the team trainings on separate sessions. He started training with me. He started going, man, this is so good. This is so good. And he went and spoke to another guy. And when COVID, when I'm actually out of quarantine, which is today, and we can start training again, I'm going to have 3 guys come see me outside of training for extra speed work. So I think some of those basketballers, they miss that. So I think that's probably the thing. If you've got a specific circumstance where you're working with a team, if you can get one guy to buy in and start working with them, and you trust yourself and you back your judgment and you can make good improvements, that will, for them, it's an easy sell to, 2 people and 3 people. Then all of a sudden you can say to the coach, hey, Johnny, Jack and Bob have all been working with me. Have you seen what they can do from a grappling point of view now? Have you seen how much stronger they are? Can I start to implement it with a team? And I think that's probably the best way to go about it, mate.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Where are you working at the moment, mate? What are you doing with yourself?
I'm at Rise. I was at Eastern Rangers before COVID. So that was why I wanted to ask, because I didn't really have the chance to implement the wrestling stuff.
Sure,
I know the guy you're talking about. I don't remember his name.
Yeah. Don't worry about it then. Keep his name.
Yeah.
But, dude, it's out there, man. So what I'll do if I was you, get the full forward, get the full back, get a ruckman, work with them, and all of a sudden, man, like you can really mold those young guys really, really well. And I know a lot of guys out at Eastern. I think Finn's out at Eastern. Finn's in here somewhere. I think I saw. Is he still at Eastern?
Yeah, that's it. Hey, mate.
But yeah, man, you go speak to Keegan, speak to Finn, and find a way to implement the program. So it's a great skill set to have. And if I was any good at it, man, I'd use it for sure.
Hi, Finn.
Hello, man. Stefan, I still remember you wrestling people at the floor of Woodford S&C, and it was phenomenal to see. I think it's definitely a skill set you should exploit.
I took it a lot more seriously the last couple of years. So.
Unreal.
Yeah, awesome, man. Great question.
Thanks.
Did I answer the one for that?
I got one. Do you think it's because? Do you think it's like the simple movements in that are actually giving that kind of change? Like, do you think it's those specific, or like a front squat, whatever they do in there, that's creating the long-term results? Or do you think it's just because it's not changing really over year to year type thing?
Really, really good question. Each of them with the college guys in particular?
Yeah, because in theory, if you pick something that did a similar kind of outcome, but wasn't those specific lifts, do you think you would just get the same results? Or is it something that, I don't know?
Honestly, man, those guys, here's the thing which nobody likes to admit. Those guys could leg press and lunge for 4 years and sprint and probably get similar results.
Yeah, okay.
No one likes to admit that, but that's the reality. But putting all this stuff aside, the best programs are the ones, and this is why I like these particular disciplines. There's progressions, regressions, and lateralizations for all these exercises that you can have. If you get an athlete to buy in, and this is the important part, it all comes down to buy-in and consistency. Like an athlete following a shit program for 4 years will be better than an athlete following a great program for 6 months. But because there are so many similar derivatives in all these disciplines, it's so easy to overload, so easy to progress, because you're not going to run out of options. If you think about, you get athletes. Athletes are hard to coach. Like sometimes they can be pain in the asses. If you write down a track and field list of progressions and regressions, and you write down a list of weightlifting progressions and regressions, and even yoga. So let's just use these 3 for now. If you can't come up with 50 derivatives of each one by adding a band, adding a change, changing stance width, changing range of motion, changing tempo, changing grip, if you can't come up with 50 different things for each one, I'd be shocked. And that's the strength of it. The strength of it is that you don't have to vary it a whole lot. So because you don't have to vary it a whole lot, you can just overload it really, really gradually. So if you gave those athletes, as it pertains to your question, if you did say, hey, we're just going to lunge and we're just going to leg press for 4 years, they would absolutely, without a doubt, see improvements. But because you don't have a lot of room to shift it laterally or progress those exercises, you don't have the same upside.
Monotony becomes a problem rather than like the actual outcome.
Exactly. So I think with these particular disciplines that I like is they have such a wide just a band of growth. Like the ceiling is so high because
they're all still similar.
That's right. Yeah, and I just feel like the ceiling is so high for all of them is that you can chase every single one of these disciplines for quite a long time and not get anywhere near excellent at any of them. But that's the con. But the pros, it does give you such a good period of time to be consistently adhering to a program. Where if you walk into a gym, and I've had this discussion with people, could elite athletes just cable fly, leg press, lat pull down, and get better? They could, absolutely. But the ceiling is a lot lower because you can't overload those exercises. Like you can overload them by tempo and load, and that's probably about it. Whereas when you look at ways you can overload things and just even lateralize them, I think they work really, really well.
Yep, makes sense.
A few of you guys are on mute. I think, was anyone talking there on mute? Nope.
Oh, I can jump in with another question then.
Is that Stefan again?
Yeah.
Yep. What's up, man? Sorry, I've just got like all these little people on my screen. I can't see everyone. Yep.
Yeah. Go for it. So just out of curiosity, for your NC State Wolfpack and NBL programs, how many athletes were running that, and just an idea of like the facilities that they did that in?
Drastically different. NC State's had a 6 in their gym. This is not they had an indoor field, which was full size, but in their gym, they had a 60-meter indoor track, 14 platforms that were double-sided, so 28 lifting spots. Like, you can't compare it. Melbourne United train out at MSAC. So there's a little APC at MSAC, which is like a separate gym next to the commercial gym. It's got cable machines, it's got squat racks, dumbbells, barbells, benches, that sort of stuff. All the same stuff, just smaller. So yeah, look, and again, the stuff in America, man, like their resources are unparalleled. So you can't really compare a whole lot to it. But NC State's kitted out. And you know what? They're probably, I would say, middle upper. They're nowhere near schools like Auburn, Oregon, Texas, LSU, Bama, like Michigan. Some of those gyms are like NC State doubled up just because they're even bigger again. So, yeah, but look, I think the equipment does play a part of it, but and you know this from a wrestling background, man. If you've got a couple of athletes and a barbell and some plates, and you look at these sort of disciplines here, you don't really need a whole lot at all. And that's probably the beauty of them as well, is that all your programs can be very minimalist in nature and then sort of branch out rather than having access to everything and trying to scale it back. Because I know myself, when I've got access to everything, my coaching actually gets worse because I start to try and justify putting something in a program. You sort of go, oh, I've got a reverse hyper there. I might use it today. Or I've got a cable machine. I might use that today. Or I've got a, what are the bloody isokinetic leg extension machine. Oh, if I've got that, I might use it. And what I tend to find, and this is where for me, again, I had to sort of draw up what I felt was really, really important. I did that for myself because I found the more stuff I had, the more, which is this thing here, the more stuff I had, the more I started to go, oh, I'll use that strength exercise. I'll use that piece of, equipment. And then I sat there and I thought, well, strength is really general anyway. So it might be like a cool donkey raised looking machine, but does it translate to their sport? I don't really think it does. I think strength is just a general strength thing. The stuff that translates to their sport is usually the power stuff and usually the motor control of the movement stuff. So That's where I tend to focus my time.
Yeah, cool. I was just curious. That's all.
I do have some great photos, man. Actually, if you guys got any other questions, I've got some photos of the gym. I'll try and bring up here somewhere.
No question, Jay. Thanks for the presentation, mate. Really interesting to hear your sort of framework for how you program and go about doing things and your experiences.
Okay.
Did you have, I suppose the question is less about specifics on programming and that kind of stuff and more on philosophy. Did you have a sort of realization moment where you kind of looked and thought, you know, what am I doing with all this? It doesn't have to be so complicated, and sort of distilled everything down? And if you did, what was that prompted it, or has it been an evolving process? Or
it's been honestly, man. I generally believe I've got more. It's a mixture of being really cynical, and I feel I've just gotten really cynical as a coach. I'm like, that's fucking stupid. Why would you do that? And I sort of went so far one way at one point, because initially I'll go to the original point. When I realized how beautifully simple things can be, where I always wanted to go to America, I always wanted to go to NC State, and what actually got me across, well, not NC State, just college in general, but what got me across there was they wanted me to be a GPS catapult guy, and I was like, look, I'll come over. But the way I got myself out of being an intern, so to speak, was I'll come over and run the catapult system and I'll run the force plates, but I need to be better coaching. I want you to show me how to coach. And I said, if you let me coach in the weight room, I'll come over. And when I got there, I was like, okay, this is where I started to go, what these guys have is a bigger scale, probably newer, probably flashier, probably better decals, but I'm not sure how many guys have been in the gym Amy Park in Melbourne. This gym's pretty similar, but this is what they're working with. Like, it's not some world-class gym. Platform, plates, bumpers, benches, dumbbells, all that sort of stuff you can see here. And you might see the tracking on the side, but that's when I realized when I got there, I'm like, it's in the execution. So when you go into YouTube and you see all these hype videos of guys doing, bounding over hurdles and bounding over, massive distances and sleds and all this exciting stuff, it's fucking gets my dick hard, man. It's really, really cool. But you go, that stuff is not done by equipment. It's done by the culture they put in place and the standard of the coaching. So what happened to me was I came back from NC State, and the first probably 12 to 18 months, I was like, well, yeah, you only need a barbell. You only need plates. You only need this. And I probably went too far the other way. And when I found myself becoming such a strength-orientated guy, that's when I started to map out this thing here, where I started to go, okay, well, what do I think constitutes really good athleticism? So I got to a period for about 12 months post coming back from America. Every athlete was power cleaning, front squatting, push pressing, chin ups, lunges, and that was about it. I was like, well, they can get better doing that. And the thing is, they were getting better. They were getting stronger. They were getting faster. They were jumping higher. And I was sitting there going, well, that's excellent. My program's working. And then I thought about it. I'm like, well, I've become a strength coach, not a athlete performance coach. So I started to sort of go, okay, what similar disciplines can lead me to my goals in the same sort of way? And I started to go, okay, well, there's aspects of track and field that I'm not tapping into. Hurdle jumps, sled starts, box jumps, bounding. I love bounding, man. It's one of the most underrated drills. Just pogos. I was sitting there going, they can do all the power cleans and squats in the world. But going back to the Pareto principle, if 80% of what they're getting is from 20% of my work, that 20% has to be very, very heavily geared to their sport. So therefore I started to go, okay, more track and field stuff, more sort of gymnastic stuff, more yoga stuff, and started to be a bit more integrated from that point of view. So my own pendulum sort of went from basically, I look back now to what I was like before I went to America, and I thought I was good. I wasn't. Then I went to just being like, strength will fix everything. Just get stronger, do cleans, look cool on video. I now sort of swung back to some sort of a hybrid model where I'm still open to different ideas. And that's why, as I said on this slide here, there's still a place for some new physio exercise. A physio might invent a new exercise tomorrow, or There might be some stuff come to the bodybuilding community or activation exercises. So I still keep on top of research for those reasons alone. But I generally feel that the majority of what I need to do with my guys will come from here. So I think, which I didn't mention in my presentation, which I should have, 20% of what I've left here, which is still open to interpretation, will come from research. I'm pretty set in what I believe in now. I've got my methods, I've got my philosophies, and I think they have stood up in a lot of different environments, which has given me the confidence to stick with them. But however, I'm open to the fact that research might come out and change it. So I'll treat that cautiously. But I just sort of feel like I have to have a base model to work off for myself now, because the higher you go up, the more job interviews you have, you do get questioned pretty, particularly. They're very direct questions. What do you believe in? How do you coach it? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And I needed to have an answer for that as I started to get jobs as I moved up. The other reason I'm just really cautious on only attributing 20% of my programs to truly evidence-based research is if you went into EndNote in 2005 and typed in resisted sprint work, you might have got 10 articles. If you go into EndNote now and type in resisted sled work or speed work, you'll get 5,000 hits, because what researchers have done is they've gone, sleds are making athletes faster. Let's not find out like what they're doing. We'll just find out how they're doing it. And they go, sleds make people faster with this load or this. And I sort of feel like research is catching up to coaches a lot. It's not always, chicken and the egg from that point of view. So, but yeah, look, man, it was probably to pinpoint it. As I said, it was probably when I came back from America. I just had to sort of figure out what I believed in, because that's when I started to go, it can be really simple. And to be honest, there is a really beautiful simplicity to track and field. There's a beautiful simplicity to gymnastics. There's a real beautiful simplicity to yoga and weightlifting and martial arts that really appeal to me. And that's what I've tried to integrate with my programs.
And then building from that, what was your first entry point to the industry or to athletic performance coaching? Like, what was your segue into it? What was your first experience?
I started in the TEC Cup. So just in the under 18s football system, similar to what Finn and Steph are doing now. I started in a rehab role. I did that for a year. I moved into what was called a high performance role. With all due respect to the TEC Cup, it wasn't a high performance role. It was just to warm the guys up, condition them, stretch them down afterwards, all that sort of stuff. But it gave me a chance to sort of run my own program. So whilst what I was doing in itself wasn't overly skilled, leading it was a really, really big benefit to me. And from there, look, to be honest, going through all my jobs, Western Jets led to Vic Metro. Vic Metro led to Collingwood. Collingwood led to, not directly to NC State, but the same guy who got me into Collingwood moved to America. Then he got me across to NC State. When I got back from NC State, Mutual Networks led me into Melbourne and Casey. And then as I moved into basketball, I went to my sister's careers day because I wanted someone who wasn't a cop or an accountant or a builder sort of thing. And my sister goes, can you speak to them? And I'd just gotten back from America. And the guy who was running that was a basketball coach. He got me down to Frankston Blues to help out at the local level in the NBL 1 or Siebel, it was back then. I started coaching a few players. I did rehab with one player, and this will probably be a good one for you, Stefan. I started rehabbing one guy who was having a lot of injuries down there at the Siebel level. He retired from basketball, moved to Melbourne United as a coach, and then I moved up to Melbourne United, basically because I had the connection with the athlete who then became a coach. So, to be honest, I've applied for a lot of jobs, man. I've missed out on a lot of jobs, but not many of them have come through application processes. All my jobs have come from just meeting people, getting results. Your athlete's always your best resume. I don't care what anybody says. Athletes move teams. Athletes talk. Athletes have money. They're very influential. I still believe I should say my clients too, not just my athletes. My clients in the private sector, they're by far my best resume. So I think that's probably what's helped the most.
Jay, I got one. I see most performance coaching and performance coaches now as we're all generalists. Like we all, as you put here, we all can do a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe we've all become kind of a slave to coaching for adaptation. What does our client want? What does the person above us want to get for our team and the clients that we're training? Would you, and I know there's a few young uni students in here, would you recommend those young students who are starting out in their coaching for adaptation or coaching a system? And like, what would be your, I guess, biggest piece of advice for the uni students in here that are just starting out in their coaching?
That's a really, really good question. I could probably talk about that for a long time, but learning to communicate is of paramount importance. And when you talk about coaching in a system, for better or for worse, there will be a reason that a coach has asked you to do something which you may not feel is beneficial. So when you talk about coaching for adaptation versus being a slave to a system, I feel like learning what constitutes a system and why things are the way they are is really, really, really important. Not necessarily more or less than coaching for an adaptation, but coaching in a system is a good thing. Having a system that you can go, okay, well, and this is what happens for you young guys, and you'll be in this situation, Stefan, with your question. It's really, really similar. Your system that Jared's talking about is not geared to individual development or group development of wrestling and tackling and jiu-jitsu. It's just not. It's not highly valued. So you can sit there and bang your head against a brick wall and give the coach 100 reasons why it should be valued and what you can contribute to that. I feel the more pragmatic approach is asking the coach why he values the things so highly that he does. Because he might be saying, nah, there's no time for wrestling, but we need to run. We have to run. And when you engage in that conversation, he might say, and you can go, okay, no problem. Like I'll be a system coach and do what you're saying. Why do you want to run so much? And he might go, well, we're not fit. There's this, that, the other, and he'll give you a reason, which then can always lead to a follow-up conversation. And if you're a really good communicator, what I would say in that example, as a particular example, coaches want to run in football because they're not fit. That's always the thing. Now, athletes who are running up and down uncontested, they always look fit. But sometimes the reason you look unfit is because when you get taken to the ground and when you're tackled, you can't get back up quickly and then go again. And anybody who has grappled, and this is quite literally a conversation you'd have with your coach, running 100-meter shuttles versus grappling for 45 seconds is just such a different type of fitness. So the key question is, can these guys I'm coaching, we'll run them, we'll get them fit, but what are they going to do when they're caught in a confrontation, wrestling, grappling, tackling, getting down, getting up? How will they respond to that? And that's where you can start to coach an adaptation based on the system that you're in. So I think they're probably interplayed really, really well. To go back to your question, Jared, about coaching for an adaptation, I think the reason we've gone so far that way is because we have this sort of, when you talk about strength and conditioning, there's a real intrinsic ego where you think you're going to make a difference to the program. And that's what leads us to do our jobs at all levels. But the adaptation you're really looking for is better performance, and trying to quantify that, you can't, it's impossible. So I think having a system that develops an athlete holistically, including mentally, in terms of how they look at their training, how they look at, their adherence to programs, how they warm up, how they perform. I think that's probably part and parcel of having a coaching to an adaptation. You need to do both. Like you can sit there and say, I'm coaching for an adaptation of strength or coaching to an adaptation of speed. But if you don't have an athlete that can, really bring that energy, that commitment to game day, then it's sort of useless. And sometimes when you're working in a system, that might mean, skipping a warm up, and you go, oh, they need to be warmed up, they have to be ready to go. Sometimes the system won't allow for that. Like I've been in times where the coach's speeches run late and we've had to skip the 1% send them out there. That's working in a system. Whereas if I was an adaptation guy, I'd be like, oh, activate the glutes, get the heart rate up, all this sort of stuff. And it doesn't always work that way. It's not always perfect. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Has anyone got one last question?
I'll see if I can bring those photos up for you too, Stefan, while you got some questions coming. So
I've got a question regarding so when you went to the States, you went to NC State and you said, I want to see how you coach and become a better coach. What was so good or different about what they were doing? In your opinion? Compared to what you'd seen at home.
Yeah. Okay. This is the best question to lead into. There is a coaching versus running a weight room are not the same thing. They're certainly linked, but where I feel there's a big deficit in Australia, there's not many coaches that run a weight room. And when I say run a weight room, how the athletes load bars up, their mood, their attitude, where you position yourself as a coach, the fluency of programs, all those things come down to running a weight room. Are athletes sort of wandering around on their phones, being really lackadaisical, or are they're there to lift, they're there to work, they're working in pairs, they're spotting for each other, they're loading each other's plates, they're deloading each other's plates, they're packing up. Running a weight room is what Americans do really well. What we tend to do in Australia is we just tend to coach, as opposed to sort of. So I'll give you an example here. This is one of the photos I loved. Every single athlete had their own pair of lifting shoes, and what they would do is they'll come in. I'll zoom out here. I'll try and tell you a bit of a story. This might actually help. So this area is the warm area here. All right, and this is what America does really well. Everyone's in here, lined up, military-like, doing their warm-up. Then they run down that little chute in the background there. They run down to the weight room, and then every single guy, all right, they lift in groups of 3, all right, and there's 3 guys to each platform. So we could lift like 60 guys at a time. And when I say about running a weight room and what that looks like to me and what I've really missed about the American system is one guy is here doing squats. One guy is here spotting him and loading his plates for him, so he doesn't load his own plates. The third guy is here, either doing mobility work, breathing work, band activation work, or something else, and then they just flip around. So the squatting guy comes down to here, the spotter goes to squat, and then, it goes the other way. So the guy doing the mobility activation stuff, whatever he's doing, he'll come to the rack. The rack guy goes to spotting, the spotting guy goes over here, and those guys work in like a little sort of microcosm of the weight room, and they're just going bang, 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 bang. So if you're the guy spotting, you have to load the plates to the guy on the bar so he can get on the rack, get off the rack as fast as he can, so stuffing around. The guy doing the mobility stuff, he knows that as soon as the guy's done spotting, done squatting, he racks the bar up, this guy comes to here, this guy squats, and they just keep moving around. And what the guys in America do so well is that's routine. It's almost military-like. And if you don't like the sort of brash, authoritarian nature of coaching, it's pretty confronting, which it was for me initially, because that's not how I coach. But when you sort of look at, this is just a sort of standard sort of racks, but when you look at what the guys did, so when you position yourself coaching, you can imagine here, all these racks down here, there's 3 people. One working out, one spotting, one ready to work out, warming up. And they just go flip, 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 flip. And then as soon as these guys are done with their 3 sets of squats, the guy spotting brings a bench down, same thing. So the guy doing the guy resting, he might start doing some band pull aparts, knowing that he's going to bench press next. One guy benching, one guy spotting. They do that, then they might move on to lunges, they might move on to the cable machines, they might do some sleds, whatever it may be. But the biggest difference in what they do is just purely and simply the logistics, the environment, the attitude, just the general demeanor of the weight room is not what we experience here. Our weight rooms, I think a lot of American coaches would cry. They're just so relaxed. They're so tail wags the dog. Players sort of waltzing around. Those guys aren't. Like, those guys are in there to work. And the head strength and conditioning coach is really an extension of the head coach. And that's probably the big thing over there, because no athletes in Australia don't play up in front of the head coach. If Simon Goodwin's in the room at Melbourne, the players are locked in. If Nathan Buckley's in the rooms at Collingwood, the players are locked in. But then all of a sudden the head strength coach takes over, and it's almost like a bit of a fun and game. And the American system is very, very geared up to be very authoritarian, sometimes to a fault. Sometimes it's very much black and white, do as I say. military, like general operation, and it can go too far. But for the most part, for me, that was a real strength to sort of go, okay, well, when I come back to Australia, I'm not just a coach. I need to run a structured weight room where every athlete knows where they need to be at every time. Like, they're not wandering around going, what's next? What am I doing? Like, they know where they need to be. And that just gets the guys just ticking through. And it creates a really good environment as well. It's really high energy, really entertaining, great music, and the guys really have fun. And that's the important part too. They really enjoy it.
Do you think that comes because you've had this experience in football in the US? Do you think that's a very football culture-based thing, or would you say it comes across in pretty much all the sports?
It probably manifests itself most in football. Basketball is very similar, and Olympic sports are a little bit more relaxed. But because football and basketball are the flagship program, they do use that to advertise how their weight rooms are run, and therefore, because most coaches who are working in Olympic sports, they sort of want to move up into football or basketball because that's the flagship programs. Culturally, what happens is the way the football program is run reflects throughout the entire school. And that's just how it is, because most coaches sort of want to go, I'm in the big time, I'm doing college football, I'm doing college basketball. So if you're doing, say, women's lacrosse, women's rowing, which are sort of small sports, by nature, those coaches are sort of going, yep, I'm going to run my weight room the same way because I want to keep building up. So it's almost like for guys here, if you run your weight room in the TSC Cup and the VFL the same way that you want to be in the AFL, that's probably the best analogy I can give you. But yeah, look, football are meathead military dudes anyway. Like that's by their nature. But parts of that program are evident throughout the whole college sports system as well. And look, not every college is exactly the same, but I'm sure you can find a lot of coaches on YouTube and Instagram that the majority of them are really routinely driven. I can send you guys some clips if you want. If you guys want to message me or email me asking for examples, I've got women's volleyball clips at USC that the coach is coaching the exact same way as men's football at NC State. Different sides of the country, different sports, different coaches, but there's a lot of similarities there to it. In both demeanor and exercise selection and execution as well.
Cool. Well, thanks for that, mate. It's really interesting.
No problem. Good questions, guys. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Jay, thank you very much. That was an awesome presentation. Definitely lived up to the hype. I'm not looking forward to following that up. Everyone, thanks for coming again. Good to see you. We've got up to 24 people tonight. If you want to share this to anyone as well, invite any of your colleagues, friends, more the merrier. Definitely all welcome. Again, I'd just like to thank Jay. Everyone, have a good evening, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks very much, guys. Appreciate your time.